The American Dream Statistics. The American dream is the belief that anyone, regardless of where they were born or what class they were born into, can attain their own version of success in a society in which upward mobility is possible for everyone. The American dream is believed to be achieved through sacrifice, risk-taking, and hard work, rather than by chance. Today, homeownership is frequently cited as an example of attaining the American dream. It is a symbol of financial success and independence, and it means the ability to control one's own dwelling place instead of being subject to the whims of a landlord. Owning a business and being one's own boss also represents the American dream fulfillment. In addition, access to education and healthcare have been cited as elements of the dream. Homeownership has steadily increased over time in the U.S., reflecting a key aspect of owning your own property as a sign of achieving the American dream. For example, the homeownership rate at the end of 2020 was 65.8%. Owning property, one's own business, and carving a life of one's own making is all part of the American dream, and the U.S. as a first-world country also offers the benefits of pursuing these passions, without having to worry about basics such as accessing good education and healthcare. The U.S. is viewed by most of its citizens as a land of opportunity. According to this belief, anyone who comes to America have the opportunity to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and succeed as long as they work hard and persevere. Those who are most worthy of America's bounty are the meritorious. This social ideal promulgates the belief that those who are the most talented, the hardest working and the most virtuous get and should get the most rewards. Hard work is seen as a powerful factor in meritocracy and a necessary element for acquiring the American dream. National surveys have found that hard work consistently scores among the top 3 factors necessary for success, and ranks with education and knowing the right people as its closet competitors. Research has demonstrated that it is exceedingly rare for Americans to go from rags to riches, and that more modest movement from the bottom of the economic ladder isn't common either. Full-time minimum wage workers cannot afford a 2-bedroom rental anywhere in the U.S. and cannot afford a 1-bedroom rental in 95% of U.S. In fact, the average minimum wage worker in the U.S. would need to work almost 97 hours per week to afford a fair market rate 2-bedroom and 79 hours per week to afford a 1-bedroom. What is more striking to many is a close look at the economic inequality in the homeland of the American dream. The United States is the most economically stratified society in the Western world. A recent study found that the top 0.01% or 14,000 American families hold 22.2% of wealth, and the bottom 90%, or over 133 million families, just 4% of the nation's wealth. Based on Internal Revenue Service figures, the richest 1% have tripled their cut of America's income pie in one generation. In 1980, the richest 1% of America took one of every 15 income dollars. Now they take 3 of every 15 income dollars. The average American believes that the richest fifth own 59% of the wealth and that the bottom 40% own 9%. The reality is strikingly different. The top 20% of U.S. households own more than 84% of the wealth, and the bottom 40% combine for a paltry 0.3%. How much CEOs and workers should earn? Estimated that the CEO to worker pay ratio was 30:1, the reality 354:1. It was found that 45% of the people in the poorest group managed to work their way out of it over the decade. 10% of them managed to make it to the middle class, and the incomes of 3.6% of them were among the highest 20% of the country. Rags to riches still happen in America. But it's notable that more than half the people who started out poor were still poor 9 years later. Of those who started in the middle income, about a third stayed there. The rest were split pretty evenly between those who climbed higher and those who slipped down. By contrast, there was a startling difference among those who began well off, a population that tends to stay that way. More than 85% of those who started out in America's richest quintile were still there a decade later. Economic status at the time of a person's birth still makes a big difference. Despite current trends of social mobility, some sectors of society have shown a much more aristocratic nature. A self-perpetuating political elite, for instance, is beginning to control the higher spheres of financial and governmental power, both in the Democrat and Republican parties. As the grandson of a senator, George W. Bush is not only the son of a president, but is also a member of wealthy business elite. John Kerry, on the other hand, married a very wealthy woman after receiving his education at a Boston posh private school, and subsequently Yale. There, and just like the Bushes, Carey belonged to the ultra-select Skull and Bones Society. Al Gore is a Harvard graduate whose father was a senator, while John McCain's grandfather and father were the first pair of father-slash-son four-star admirals in the United States Navy. Historically, Barack Obama is one of the first serious candidates without blue blood pedigree, who is also a member of an ethnic minority. In the article, The American Myths of the Self-Made Men, The American Dream and Meritocracy, the self-made man myth is alive and well in Silicon Valley, built on the dream of the next killer app or technological device, where success stories of people like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg flood the mainstream media. It's interesting to note that most rags to riches success stories are defined in terms of doing well in business and making lots of money. Yet, rarely do we hear about the significant investments and contributions by family, friends, associates, protagonists, antagonists, advisors, teachers, authors, mentors, coaches, and the list could go on. Between 1980 and 2020, billionaires in the US saw their wealth soar by 1,130%, increasing more than 200 faster than median wages. At the same time, the tax obligations of billionaires in the US declined by 78% between 1980 and 2018. An estimated 34% to 45% of wealth in the US is inherited, according to a 2005 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, and intergenerational class mobility is notoriously difficult. In 2020 alone, children will inherit around $764 billion and pay an average of just 2.1% on this income. By contrast, for working people, the average tax rate is 15.8%, 7 times more. Americans thought the richest 20% of American society controlled about 59% of the country's wealth, while the real number is actually 84%. At the same time, the survey respondents believed that the top 20% should own only 32% of the wealth. In contrast, in Sweden, a country with significantly greater economic equality, 20% of the richest people there control only 36% of the wealth of the country. Behind many self-proclaimed bootstrapped billionaires is not just their parents' cash but also the soft assets, or what sociologists call social capital, that come along with being raised in and around wealth. To examine the myth of mobility, researchers focused on the chances of making it into the top 10, 5, or 1%. That these chances are abysmal. Only 0.2% of those who began in the bottom quintile made it into the top 1%. In contrast, 82.7% of those who began in the top 1% remained in the top 10% a decade later. Among America's most cherished core values is the belief that the United States is a land of opportunity, and that it uniquely offers to citizens the potential for rising from rags to riches, provided that citizens have the necessary ability and work hard. This is a myth. Income and wealth disparity in the United States is much higher in the United States than in any other Western democracies. So is hereditary socioeconomic immobility.